So I'm from ENGIE. Who are we? I wouldn't blame many of you for not knowing that. We are a large global PLC. Our heritage is very much in the energy sector, although that's repositioning slightly, as I'll talk a little bit more. And I think on the next slide you'll see these are the sort of things we do. It's a lot of power, and increasingly that's green power, it's renewable power. It's looking at networks globally. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, and customer solutions. We've been on a real journey in the last 3 years, focusing on 3 key topics. And those topics are decarbonisation, decentralisation, and digitisation. They are wonderfully vague words that can mean a million things to a million different people. But what they mean for us, we're very clear about. So decarbonisation, that's quite easy. So ENGIE has had a legacy of having a lot of fossil-fuelled power plants around the world. It burnt a lot of coal, it burnt a lot of oil, and it burnt a lot of gas, which, without getting into the boring technical detail, isn't considered the green kind of gas. And it took a view 3 years ago that it wanted to shift its business model, and it made a promise to its shareholders, and it made a promise to the market that it was going to go on a large repositioning in terms of its asset base. It's now completed that, and what that looks like is 15 billion euros worth of assets have been sold in the last 3 years, and that has almost been wholly reinvested in greener technologies. That's solar, that's wind, it's hydrogen, and because these are the technologies that we believe are the technologies of the future in terms of energy production. Decentralisation, now what we mean by that is, if you think about how the UK is currently powered in the main, or certainly historically, you've got lots of big power stations, often in the middle of nowhere for obvious reasons in case they decide to go a little bit wrong, and then they power a national grid which we draw energy from. There is inherent inefficiency in that system in terms of the grid, and also those power producing assets are often using some of those less green fuels that I talked about before. So decentralisation is bringing the production of that energy, or indeed that heat, closer to the end user. So a simple world example is a solar panel on your roof. That is an example of decentralisation. It's power that your home would want to use. That is meters, or in some instances probably centimetres from where it's actually being used for the end user. In a city context, that can be district heating networks, district cooling networks. There are many of these already within the UK. Many of them are owned and operated by ENGIE. But we see this global networks as also being a key part of the strategy going forward, and moving away from those large decentralised assets. Customer solutions, we, as all organisations are these days, very much a customer-centric organisation, or at least we certainly aspire to be. We're by no means the finished product, and we're becoming closer and closer to our customer, partly through that decentralisation agenda. If you're going to generate heat and power closer to your customer, you're going to get closer to your customer and more aligned to their business needs and their business priorities. The next slide is some numbers. I shan't dwell on them. Hopefully provides enough context of some credibility that there's a reason why I'm standing up here talking about clean energy. We're big by any measure that you choose. So that's us globally. If I bring it down to the UK, and then I'll bring it down to the Northeast a little bit as well. So I think it's a few more slides on. So of that 65 billion euros a year, sorry, I've skipped the slide out. I'll go to the next one. Of that 65 billion euros a year, a decent chunk of that's in the UK. Some 6.5–7%, depending on what exchange rate you want to use on any given day. The UK punches far above its weight compared to that in terms of how it's perceived within the ENGIE group. We've got all aspects of the group's activity here, a significant amount of generation. Of that 2.2 gigawatts, don't worry about what that means, just accept that it's a lot. 2 gigawatts of that is all within Electric Mountain. Have any of you ever been to Wales and Snowdon? Festiniog and Dinorwig? It was an international power asset many years ago, a generational piece of infrastructure. It's a reservoir at the top, you open the tap, it flows through a turbine at the bottom, power is produced. At any given point in time, that asset can power over 1 million homes in the UK and can do so at 30 seconds notice from the national grid. That's why it's really important. It takes a conventional power station between half an hour and 60 minutes to go from not being operational to producing power. So when we're all boiling our kettle, after EastEnders is finished, or the half-time of a World Cup match, we get a phone call to open that tap. We're in partnership with many councils, and I'll come to why that's really important to us maybe a little bit later on, because they're a key part of the ecosystem when it comes to energy. We're employing over 17,000 people. Nearly 3,000 of that is here in the northeast. And by northeast, I'm talking about the northeast and Teesside in this scenario. We really value the region. We've got our corporate head office based in the region, up in North Tyneside. And we've got some of our most exciting development projects here in the northeast. I'm going to spend most of my time on the next slide now, which is growth areas. But I want to set some context for what these things mean. So I'm talking about clean energy today, which, again, is an extremely broad term. So I want to make this more real and why we think clean energy is important. So clean energy is about air quality. That's the byproduct. That's the end game. Air quality is a thing which any of you that read the press will already be aware of that. But I want to take away the illusion that this is a city centre problem, it's a London problem, it's a Birmingham problem, it's a Leeds problem. It's not. I live in North Tyneside. It's not a big city. It has an air quality problem in certain pockets of the borough. This is an issue that we're all facing. Solving air quality involves taking on a clean energy agenda. It's about climate change and reducing the amount of carbon that is in the energy value chain. ENGIE were a major supporter of the COP21 agreement in Paris and the subsequent COP22 agreement in Marrakesh. We firmly stand by the commitments that were made there in terms of reducing and slowing climate change and moving to a low carbon economy. It's about fuel poverty. 2.3 million homes in the UK are currently in fuel poverty right now. That's just over 10%. Clean energy is a solution to help addressing fuel poverty. And it's about resilience. So some of our speakers have already talked about this. I'm sure we'll hear more about it later. Industrial revolution, the industrial strategy, all of this needs to be powered. The current method of powering that, oil, coal, gas, these are scarce. There's only so much of them, and once they're gone, it takes an awful long time to get any more of them. So we need a strategy that gives resilience to these key pillars that are going to drive the UK economy going forward. Some of those are local, and again, thank you for Steve for sort of teeing up for this one. So we've got some fantastic engines for these activities in the northeast. Up in Northumberland, we've got the renewable catapult. It's a fabulous, fabulous asset. Great inward investment here into the northeast. In Newcastle, we've got Nick A and Nick D, National Innovation Centre for Ageing, National Innovation Centre for Data. Again, don't be confused that these things have got nothing to do with clean energy. They absolutely have. We've got the IAMP in Sunderland near Nissan looking at advanced manufacturing. And then here closer to home, the Centre for Process Automation. All of these things need to be powered in a resilient way, and clean energy is a huge part of that. So these are the growth areas for ENGIE. It is what it says in the tin, embracing the lower carbon economy, being more efficient in an increasingly digital world. Digital is important in this. Now, there's a reason why data centres are rated in kilowatt hours. These two things go hand in hand. Now, some of these are slightly, maybe less clear why they're up here. The ones that are obvious, the low carbon economy, energy will be well embedded in buildings and places. That's my decentralisation argument, so I'll focus on some of them. And I think I'll start with this low carbon economy. It will require investment, but I'll tell a bit of a story because I'm an accountant by training, so I do enjoy a number and a stat. So I'll take you on a journey going back some 14, 15 months ago. So in April 2017, we had the first ever coal-free day in the UK. Quite often these stories sort of pop up on the BBC website and you read them and think, oh, that's quite interesting. Not quite sure what that means. This is a monumental occasion. We had no coal burnt in the UK for a whole 24 hours. To give an idea of how quickly things are moving, fast forward to April 2018, and it was more than a day. We went 55 hours without burning one bit of coal in the UK. Part of this is incentivisation in terms of some of the levies and taxations on coal. It's partly because technologies are getting better, technologies are becoming cheaper, but this is really moving in the right direction, and it's moving at a rapid pace, which is something that should be applauded. November 2017, the first ever subsidy-free solar farm down in Kent. Again, partly because technology is getting more efficient, technology is getting cheaper, but subsidy-free. So again, the myth of renewable technology only working because of subsidies, that myth has already started to be dispelled and will continue to be. If I think of some of ENGIE's major investments, and again, I don't want to dwell too much on the Brexit point, but I do think it's relevant. ENGIE will be investing over £1 billion in the next 5 years in the Moray East wind farm. Now that's up off Scotland. What does that mean for the North East? A major part of the supply chain for that project will come from the North East. There's major engagement with that Renewable Energy Catapult Centre up in Blyth in Northumberland. And again, not to get overly politicised about this, there's a strike price on that wind farm for £57. That compares to 90 for nuclear. People will be a lot more familiar with the nuclear debates that go on, but just take that in for a second, more than a third cheaper. We'll talk about another major infrastructure project. I asked his permission before I said this. I've got Andrew Hodgson, the chief exec of this project, in the crowd. The Atlantic Superconnector. Those of you who may have read about it in the press or be involved in it already. A 1,500 kilometre, effectively, wire. It's going to come from Iceland, fully powered by geothermal and hydroelectric power, coming into the northeast coastline. 1 million homes. A £65 strike price, again, a third cheaper than nuclear. These technologies are real. These have already been deployed elsewhere in the world. We ourselves have already worked on projects like this elsewhere in the world. These are the sorts of technologies that are going to be powering this industrial revolution, that are going to be powering the industrial strategy. If I think about embedded and decentralized opportunities and things that are real here already, so I applaud the ambition of the South East Development Corporation in terms of their master planning for the site in Redcar, looking to power that site by 100% renewable technologies, and doing so in a way that brings lots of technologies together. It's not just a bit of solar, it's not just a bit of biomass, it's not just a bit of tidal power, it's not just a bit of wind, it's bringing it all together, employing battery technology. The wind isn't always blowing, the sun isn't always shining. So coming up with a solution that works in a holistic way to power a major industrial site. But that's real. I strongly believe that that will happen. These technologies, again, they are real. We look a little bit further up the coastline. We have just signed a 40-year energy partnership with Newcastle Council with a clear mandate to reduce the carbon that is produced by the council. That will take many forms. The first form it's taking is a district heating and cooling network around what was the Science Central site, recently rebranded as the Helix. That will be a 40-year partnership. There will be more things that will come after that. And I think that's the partnership point, which I think I want to probably end on here. That's a partnership between a large private sector organisation in terms of ENGIE, with Newcastle Council, with Newcastle University and with Legal & General as a funder, working together to try and come up with a solution that achieves some of the outcomes that I've been talking about here today, and I think that's really, really key. But I take a lot of confidence in seeing those sorts of partnerships all up and down the North East, with all of the major universities in the North East. As someone who has worked for ENGIE for over 10 years, and for most of that time been down in London, and only been back in the North East for some 18 months, it's been absolutely great seeing how tight-knit the business community is in the North East. I think you made the point before, it's easy to do business up here, partly because actually, quite frankly, people are just nice, aren't they? we seem to manage to get along quite well, and it gives us a really good chance of actually getting some stuff done. So I think I've got 90 seconds left-ish, so we'd be very happy to take any questions if anyone has any, or we've got time in the breakout, or if you're lucky enough to be in our plenary session later on. Please.
Could you tell me exactly what you mean by...
Probably not if it's exactly, but go on, keep going. Yeah. I'll try.
Requiring major new infrastructure. What type of infrastructure might that be?
So I think it's, so some of the examples I talked about in terms of the Atlantic Superconnector, that's a major bit of infrastructure. If I think about the hydroelectric facility up in Wales, that was built some 30 years ago. Quite frankly, the economics would not suggest you build that again today. That's a question that maybe should be considered, because we love the fact that we've got it now. That's because it's been paid for and it's operating. I think some of that infrastructure will deal in those renewable technologies. You know, we haven't got a huge amount of land. You know, we're not China, we're not the States. We can't blanket it with solar and wind. So we're going to have to be really careful and think about how we want to do that. But East Moor is a great example in terms of offshore wind. It's several miles off the coastline. It's not on a fishing route or a major industrial route in terms of boats and fleet. That's going to power 1,000 homes. So there are solutions that can deal with the challenge that we're facing in terms of infrastructure, but it will take a combined effort in terms of partnership and policy to make that happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
That's great. Thank you, James.
thank you, John. Amazing potential in that sector, and again, we'll get into those discussions later on, but thank you, that was spot on.